We're back. I think we are on our normal meeting time, just a few minutes late here. It is 7:30 Eastern, and all the rest you can adjust as needed. I was just back on the East Coast this weekend, Philadelphia actually, but now you find me in Spokane as is my usual. Uh, Very good to see everybody back here. If there is anything I can do to answer any questions you might have, put them in the chat on Twitch. All right, there we go. I think that we left off last time talking about Frederick Douglass over here, but actually ended up discussing C.L.R. James's Beyond a Boundary, probably as much or more. I think that was mostly intentional, um, given that we're attempting to understand both teaching and games. And so, since we talked a lot about teaching with William James, it made sense to shift the focus a little bit more to games here in our next text with the Life of Frederick Douglass. I know that seems like a little bit of a stretch, but the idea there was that with the context of a game, in James's case, cricket, that we could better understand larger social contexts and constructs that he's interested in. In his case, a lot of literature, and it turns out for Douglas as well. Um, but today, I think we will look more at Frederick Douglass and how he comes to his great moment of learning to read. We'll think about learning to read in a literal sense and in a bit of a metaphorical sense as well. Oh, great. Memory saver sounds very nice. I'm going to leave that alone for now. Um, this is our talks to teachers on video games, and so we'll also take a look at EarthBound, my favorite video game, one that I return to every so often, and one that has a lot to teach about reading in a literal and metaphorical uh, register. I hope that some of you out there are also listening along to the Mythgard Academy right now, which is looking into Till We Have Faces by C.S. Lewis. If anyone out there is also a listener of Mythgard Academy, watcher on Twitch or whatever it might be on YouTube, etc., um, please put in any thoughts and comments you might have about some of the connections there. Because after all, this project is all about looking at those connections between our teaching, what we do as teachers, and what we do as readers, as students, and then what we do as those of us who play video games or those of us who are interested in the impact of games on culture, seeing all the connections there. That's what we're here for. And I think that there is a lot to be said for um, the friendships, the playfulness of Lewis and Tolkien in their writing, the ways in which their fantasy writing is serious play. It's not their job as teachers exactly, but they're certainly interested in the ways that they can get meaning out of stories and weave it into stories. They're certainly interested in teachers or the role of mentors and teachers within their stories too. And so that's where I think the fox, the character who is the tutor and mentor until we have faces, might might be on people's minds. So I invite any comments or questions about that here too. Um, so anyways, gonna keep it pretty short today. So we'll just look at a important passage here to go into Frederick Douglass, and then we'll look at an important passage in EarthBound as well. This is in chapter 7, so I think it's around page 80 of my book, and then this one that I just borrowed. Wow. Oh, that's right. This is the multi-volume. Um, so we'll have to adjust because this is an edition that is not my own. Chapter 7. Chapter 10 is a long one. Once he's back. Chapter 7, though, a short one. All right. So this is after he leaves the plantation where he's born and joins a town family to be the companion of young Master Hugh. Um, he writes about, as he says here, oh, geez. Oh, no. Oh, no. Oh, no. The way this jumps around, I'm so sorry. He writes here about the stratagems that he uses. So again, an appeal to the language of a game, or of war for that matter, in his learning to read. During this time, when he's with his master in town, I succeeded in learning to read and write. In accomplishing this, I was compelled to resort to various stratagems. I had no regular teacher. My mistress, who had kindly commenced to instruct me, had, in compliance with the advice and direction of her husband, not only ceased to instruct, but had set her face against my being instructed by anyone else. It is due, however, to my mistress to say of her that she did not adopt this course of treatment immediately. She at first lacked the depravity indispensable to shutting me up in mental darkness. It was at least necessary for her to have some training in the exercise of irresponsible power to make her equal to the task of treating me as though I were a brute. Yeah, teacher talks. And if you are a teacher, if you are a student, I would really like to hear from you, Meow Indeed. I'm not sure where you would place yourself on those options. Maybe a little bit of both. Um, so he is without a teacher. Um, he has his mistress at first teaching him, but she is told not to. And then we get this language of her own training, as he puts it, in the exercise of irresponsible power. So the effect of her power to keep him from learning uh, leads to her own depravity, uh, her own form of dehumanization. This is something he's going to explain next here. So um, he describes how at first she was, as he puts it here, a pious, warm, and tender-hearted woman. There was no sorrow or suffering for which she had not a tear. She had bread for the hungry, clothes for the naked, and comfort for every mourner that came within her reach. I think you're hearing perhaps some echoes there of more biblical language and stories. And that context, I think, is pretty important here um, for the kind of hardening of her heart that's going to take place. Um, Slavery soon proved its ability to divest her of these heavenly qualities. Under its influence, the tender heart became stone. The lamb-like disposition gave way to one of tiger-like fierceness. The first step in her downward course was in her ceasing to instruct me. She now commenced to practice her husband's precepts. She had become even more violent in her opposition than her husband himself. Not satisfied with doing as well as he had commanded, she seemed anxious to do better. Nothing seemed to make her more angry than to see me with a newspaper. She seemed to think that here lay the danger. I have had her rush at me with a face made all up of fury, and snatch from me a newspaper in a manner that fully revealed her apprehension. She was an apt woman, and a little experience soon demonstrated to her satisfaction that education and slavery were incompatible with each other. So a lot is mixed up in her motivation as he understands it, her submission to her husband, her fear of losing power, losing control, her um, her aptness, that is her own aptitude for learning. In this case, she's being instructed in how to maintain and wield power. And of course, within the context of slavery, that is an irresponsible and unjust power, as he puts it. So, how does he learn to read? The mistress taught him the alphabet. She had given him the inch, and no precaution could prevent him from taking the L. So there is that idea of a teacher, at least to begin with, learning the alphabet. Here's his plan. Um, Making friends with all the little white boys whom I met in the street. As many of these as I could, I converted into teachers. It's a very interesting turn of phrase. With their kindly aid obtained at different times and different places, I finally succeeded in learning to read. When I sent of errands, I always took my book with me. By going one part of my errand quickly, I found time to get a lesson before my return. I also used to carry bread with me, enough of which was always in the house, to which I was always welcome. And in this regard, he is better off than many of the poor white children of the neighborhood. And in return, they would give him the valuable bread of knowledge. So again, uh, literal and metaphorical bread. Um, and he doesn't give their names because he's afraid that it might embarrass them. Embarrass, I think, has a stronger meaning here in his uh, time, because it is almost an unpardonable offense to teach slaves to read in this Christian country. Again, definitely using these Christian turns of phrase with a purpose, by bringing that before the reader's mind to highlight the hypocrisy of the status quo at that time. Um, so his teachers are fellow children, um, children who know more at that time than he does, and who are disposed to share what they know with him in exchange for, um, in some cases at least, his payment comes in the form of food. So they are poor but have some knowledge. He has means or access to supply them with their wants, and in return, they teach him to read. So there's some conversations that take place with them, uh, and he gives one here near the shipyard. He used to talk the matter of slavery over with them, and he would say to them he wished he could be as free as they would be when they got to be men. You will be free as soon as you're 21, but I am a slave for life. Have not I as good a right to be free as you have? These words used to trouble them. They would express for me the liveliest sympathy and console me with the hope that something would occur by which I might be free. So the kind of um, timeline, kind of future that he sees for himself becomes unbearable. The idea that he's going to be a slave for life no matter what. Um, he's reading all these stirring speeches. He cites them here. And he describes the horrible pit, as he puts it here, um, that he feels that reading and knowledge has become for him. So as I writhed under, and he, sorry, I'm reading back and trying to find the antecedent here. The very discontent which Master Hugh had predicted would follow my learning to read had already come, to torment and sting my soul to unutterable anguish. As I writhed under it, I would at times feel that learning to read had been a curse rather than a blessing. It had given me a view of my wretched condition without the remedy. It opened my eyes to the horrible pit, but no ladder upon which to get out. In moments of agony, I envied my fellow slaves for their stupidity. I've often wished myself a beast. I preferred the condition of the meanest reptile to my own. Anything, no matter what, to get rid of thinking. It was this everlasting thinking of my condition that tormented me. There was no getting rid of it. It was pressed upon me by every object within sight or hearing, animate or inanimate. The silver trump of freedom had roused my soul to eternal wakefulness. Freedom now appeared to disappear no more forever. It was heard in every sound and seen in everything. It was ever present to torment me with a sense of my wretched condition. I saw nothing without seeing it. I heard nothing without hearing it, and felt nothing without feeling it. I looked from every star. Sorry, it looked from every star. It smiled in every calm, breathed in every wind, and moved in every storm. It there being freedom. Um, the power of knowledge is felt at first there to be a curse rather than a blessing. It causes such pain. Again, the idea that he will never be free, no matter how much he learns, he'll just be more aware of the unjustness, the the pain of his condition. And with that in mind, thinking about the way that he sees freedom everywhere and the way that he can't help but pursue learning. Once he's started, he dives in after. Um, this to me has a strong connection with the ways in which people today, students in school, or just people in their daily life, their home life perhaps, are brought into the world of literacy, of reading. Um, there is a total openness, I think, now to teaching people to read, and even more strongly than that, there is the the total expectation that everyone be a reader, that everyone pursue knowledge, um, at least in some form. And so to think of a time in which that was not the case, again, as we have discussed before, can seem very strange. But I think it's incredibly illuminating to see this perspective, um, to see the effect that learning has in a context where that learning is far from being promoted, is actually prohibited and strongly frowned upon. Um, the way that we today uh, prevent people from doing things that might seem to come natural, I think, using we in the most broad sense here, we as teachers, we as parents and family, um, we still have a sense of the use of time, the use of childhood being in some way determined, right? Being laid out as a curriculum, being laid out as a plan of study um, in school, and a lot of the time that might otherwise be free time, we plan out. We find sort of organized or at least semi-organized activities to do. Um, Now, that's not a bad thing. I don't think we want to leave totally unstructured all of our kids' time. But it is noteworthy that if you had to ask, what is it that we now, all of us, um, actively try to prevent, right? In some sense, it is the free use of time. Now, it's very loaded, right? That free use, how free is it really when they are students, children are bombarded at all times with things that are taking up their attention. Um, Thinking especially now of video games. Um, they may feel that that is what they want to spend their time doing, and we probably could give reasons why that is not the best thing to do for most of the time. But I don't know that we can be so sure that it isn't a worthwhile activity, at least for part of their time. This is where I think the power of video games may lie in the ways that they also teach lessons, even when it's not obvious that that's what's happening. So the example that I love to give for this is in EarthBound. And I'm running out of time here, having read this long passage and try to share in some way the perspective that Frederick Douglass offers here. There isn't a lot of time now to talk about EarthBound, but I'll just pose it as our homework for next time. Um, Go back to EarthBound, or if you've never played it, go and play it or watch a playthrough, because early in that game, there are some significant passages of text which are necessary to understand what is going on in the story. To be a player of EarthBound, you have to be, at least to some extent, a reader. And to engage in the story and to begin your quest, um, you have to be a writer and reader as well. This I find extremely interesting. It's not an educational game in the usual sense, but it is a game that is profoundly able to teach both lessons and skills, um, both literal reading and metaphorical reading comes through in EarthBound. So we will finally get around to looking at that video game for next time. Um, Sorry we didn't get to it today, but I think uh, if you are still reading the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, that is well worth your time as well. Of course, as we said, there are some longer autobiographies that he wrote as well. Um, this is just the shortest and first. But for next time, we will turn our attention mainly to the ways in which play and reading are connected in EarthBound. Um, I think that our only comment here we've addressed as much as possible. I hope that anyone out there listening afterwards will reach out to us if you have any comments and questions about this project or about these particular texts. Thanks again for tuning in for this infrequent, but I hope helpful discussion on Twitch. This has been Teacher Talks, and I will look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks. That'll be uh, 2 weeks from now that we'll sit down and discuss EarthBound some more. Till then, take care and happy reading.